In the 12th century, a legend was born. Inside the palace of Ajmer, her newborn son, future leader of the Chauhan dynasty, Prithviraj was destined for greatness. In the late 12th century, the Chahamana kingdom reached its zenith. Under the confident rule of King Prithviraj Chauhan, Ajmer and Delhi flourished in unparalleled peace. We must expand our borders.
In the late 12th century, Muhammad Ghori began his ambitious campaign, mobilizing thousands toward northern India.
Warriors, today we fight for our motherland, for honor and for victory!
In 1191, the forces of Tarain collided.
For Lana! For our land and our honor, charge!
Following the epic victory at Tarain, the streets of Ajmer and Delhi erupt in pure joy. Flowers and banners decorate every corner. Legendary King Prithviraj Chauhan.
Following his defeat in 1191, Ghori began to rebuild his army. This time, failure was not an option.
At dawn, two worlds collide. The Ghurid horsemen utilize hit-and-run tactics. Prithviraj Chauhan commands a massive force. This day would redefine the history of India. The battle reached its tragic end. Prithviraj stood firm.
While contemporary Persian chronicles depict one account, later Rajput oral traditions paint a different, legendary fate, leaving both to shape the king's enduring legacy.
A blinded king stands in the shadowy courtyard of his captor. Guided only by the sound of a voice, he draws a heavy bow and fires the single fatal arrow that assassinates Muhammad of Ghor. This is the legendary climax of the life of Prithviraj Chauhan. 8 centuries later, he remains a massive cultural icon, celebrated in statues and cinema as the ultimate symbol of Indian resistance. Popular tradition remembers him as the last Hindu emperor, a flawless and invincible ruler who commanded the subcontinent from the ancient political center of Delhi. This cinematic version of the king has dominated the public consciousness for nearly 1,000 years. The historical evidence tells a jarringly different story. The legendary archery assassination is a later invention, and his status as a Delhi-based emperor is a geographical myth. This 12th century coin from the Delhi Mint provides a more grounded reality. It bears the names of both Prithviraj and his enemy, Muhammad bin Sam. This physical record proves that Prithviraj survived his final battle as a captured vassal. If the historical reality ended in total defeat and captivity, how did this 12th century monarch evolve into an immortalized, invincible hero? The real Prithviraj ascended the Chahamana throne at age 11. He governed from Ajmer, the actual capital of his dynasty. This map shows the geopolitical board of the 1170s. The young king was surrounded by powerful local rivals, the Chandelas, Gahadavalas, and Chalukyas. Prithviraj launched aggressive expansion campaigns in almost every direction, waging bitter wars against the Chandelas and Chalukyas. Later Bardic tales reimagined these events as romantic epics, focusing on the elopement with rival princesses. However, the military consequence was severe. He turned every neighboring power into an enemy. These early tactical victories created a strategic disaster. By the time a massive foreign threat arrived from the west, Prithviraj had isolated himself from every potential ally in India. That threat was the Ghurid Empire, led by Muhammad of Ghor. Their first major clash with the Chauhan forces occurred in 1191 at the First Battle of Tarain. It was a decisive victory for Prithviraj. His coalition of Rajput kings routed the Ghurid army and forced Muhammad to retreat in disgrace. Prithviraj treated the victory as a minor frontier skirmish. He failed to pursue the retreating enemy or fortify his borders, a mistake that gave Muhammad time to rebuild. Muhammad spent the next year assembling a specialized force of 120,000 horsemen. In 1192, he returned to Tarain with a strategy designed to exploit Rajput tactics. Using decoy campfires to fake a truce, Muhammad secretly divided his forces into 4 attack divisions. At dawn, the Ghurids launched a feigned retreat, pulling Prithviraj's exhausted army out of formation. Finally, Muhammad deployed his reserve, 10,000 mounted archers who decimated the Chauhan lines. The Chauhan army was annihilated. Prithviraj was captured and, after a brief period as a puppet ruler, executed for alleged treason. The defeat at the Second Battle of Tarain was a hinge event that permanently shifted the power structure of the entire Indian subcontinent. The collapse at Tarain cleared the path for the Islamic conquest of northern India and the rise of the Delhi Sultanate. This epic-ending defeat inflicted a deep psychological trauma on the local populace. Over the following centuries, a new narrative took shape. Rajput bards and Jain scholars systematically began to rewrite the history of the fall of the Chauhans. In these texts, his tactical failures were reframed as honorable flaws, and his total defeat became a story of treacherous betrayal. His prison execution was replaced by the legend of the blindfolded assassin. Later legends even moved his capital from Ajmer to the ruins of Delhi, establishing him as a symbol of lost Indian power. Prithviraj Chauhan lost his kingdom on the battlefield, but he conquered the historical record. A culture's need for an enduring legend eventually proved more powerful than the facts of its defeat.
We're going to detangle the facts from the fiction to understand exactly why his reign was such a pivotal milestone in the history of the Indian subcontinent.
Section 1. The Boy King Ascends. So born in Gujarat right around 1166, Prithviraj actually inherited the throne in 1177 at just 11 years old after the death of his father. Naturally, his mother stepped in to manage the administration with a regency council at first. But by the time we hit the 1190s, he's out there leading massive armies in the monumental battles of Tarain. It's really helpful to keep this chronology in mind because it sets the actual historical boundaries of a very short yet immensely consequential life.
Now, when we do our historical detective work, we run into a bit of a snag. We have very few actual inscriptions from his reign. That means we have to rely on texts of wildly varying credibility to figure him out. The Prithviraj Vijaya is a contemporary text, so it's quite reliable. But then there's the Prithviraj Raso. This is the epic poem that truly catapulted him into legendary status, supposedly written by his court poet Chand Bardai. The catch? Historians consider the Raso to have very low historical reliability because of massive exaggerations and anachronisms that were tacked on by later Rajput courts.
And, you know, that myth-making started incredibly early, even when it came to his education. The epic Prithviraj Raso claims the king mastered a frankly impossible 14 languages, on top of medicine, mathematics, and philosophy. Meanwhile, the contemporary, much more grounded text, the Prithviraj Vijaya, states he mastered a still very impressive 6. But both texts absolutely agree on one crucial detail. The young king was a highly proficient archer. Keep that in your back pocket, because that specific skill becomes a massive focal point in the legends about his ultimate fate.
Section 2. Conquests and Romantic Legends. While the romantic epics love to claim he just utterly decimated his rivals, the historical evidence tells a completely different story. For instance, the Prithviraj Raso features this incredibly dramatic tale where Prithviraj supposedly fought and killed King Bhima II of Gujarat to avenge his father's death. Makes for amazing poetry, sure, but historical records prove Bhima II actually outlived Prithviraj by nearly 50 years. The reality is that Prithviraj actually had to sign a peace treaty with the Chalukya dynasty of Gujarat sometime before 1187. Real history is just so much more pragmatic than poetic legend.
But honestly, no legend is bigger than the Samyogita elopement. The story goes that a rival king held a husband selection ceremony, a Swayamvara, for his daughter Samyogita, but he deliberately excluded Prithviraj. So, in this brazen display of courage, Prithviraj rides into the ceremony with 100 warriors, fighting off entire armies just to elope with the princess. Now, this incredibly famous romantic tale is totally absent from the rival Gahadavala records. However, because it pops up in 3 other distinct medieval sources, scholars suggest there actually might be a kernel of historical truth behind this legendary, daring rescue.
Section 3. The Battles of Tarain.
21.
That is the absolutely staggering number of times the epic Prithviraj Chauhan claims our king fought, defeated, and mercifully captured the invading leader Muhammad of Ghor, only to release him unharmed every single time. It's obviously an astronomical figure, specifically designed to emphasize the Chahamana king's ultimate supremacy and moral high ground.
But let's look at the historical consensus. While Hindu and Jain texts claim anywhere from 7 to 21 Chauhan victories, Muslim and historical accounts strictly document just 2 major battles at Tarain. Now, Prithviraj definitely repulsed early frontier raids, but history confirms just these 2 massive, decisive clashes. And to be totally clear, the First Battle of Tarain in 1191 was a resounding, undisputed victory for Prithviraj. His forces utterly routed the Ghurid army, and Muhammad of Ghor was badly injured and forced to retreat.
Which brings up a really compelling narrative question. Did romance and neglect lead to Prithviraj's ultimate downfall? We kind of have to ask this because later legends, and actually even some Jain chronicles, claim that following his 1191 victory and his elopement with Samyogita, the king became just way too infatuated with his new bride. The stories say he ignored state affairs, failed to prepare, and basically left himself completely vulnerable for Muhammad of Ghor's massive vengeful return the very next year in 1192.
And that sets the stage for the Second Battle of Tarain. Scholars argue that the Ghurid victory here wasn't just about troop numbers. It was about deeply deceitful military tactics that caught the Chauhan camp completely off guard. First, Muhammad of Ghor fakes a truce to buy time. He keeps his campfires burning all night to create the illusion that his army is stationary. Then, boom, he launches a surprise attack at dawn while the Chauhan camp is sleeping. Finally, after luring them into this exhausting pursuit, he deploys a fresh reserve of 10,000 mounted archers. The Chauhan forces were decimated, and Prithviraj was captured.
Section 4. Conflicting Tales of Death.
Following his devastating defeat and capture near the modern city of Sursa, the historical record just completely shatters. Talk about the ultimate Rashomon effect. History becomes wildly malleable depending on who's doing the writing. Some Jain texts claim he was beheaded with an axe after Ghori saw insulting paintings in the Chahamana gallery. Another text claims he was stoned to death in a pit after trying to shoot Ghori but hitting a metal statue instead. Another says he simply starved. But the most famous legend by far is from the Raso. It claims Prithviraj was taken to Ghazna, blinded, but managed to shoot and kill Muhammad of Ghor using only the sound of his voice in this legendary archery trick.
But what does the hard, physical evidence say? It points to a much more grounded, political reality. Archaeologists have actually found these fascinating horse and bullman-style coins issued from the Delhi Mint that bear the names of both Prithviraj and the Ghurid ruler, Muhammad bin Sam. This strongly suggests he wasn't killed instantly, and he definitely wasn't taken to Ghazla to perform blind archery tricks. Instead, the evidence indicates he was briefly reinstated as a Ghurid vassal in his capital of Ajmer. Shortly after that, he rebelled against his captors and was executed for treason.
Section 5. The Man versus the Myth.
It's truly amazing to neutrally trace how his characterization shifted so dramatically over time. If you look at 14th and 15th century texts by Jain authors, they often portray him as an inept and unworthy king whose arrogance led to his own ruin. But fast forward to the 16th century, under the patronage of Rajput courts, the Prithviraj Raso transforms him into a flawless, invincible hero. And today, modern media, television, and film have evolved him yet again, framing him predominantly as a symbol of national unity and patriotic resistance.
So, I want to leave you with this famous, albeit historically inaccurate, label bestowed by a 19th century British officer, James Todd. He famously called Prithviraj the last Hindu emperor. Now, historians know for a fact there were many powerful Hindu rulers long after 1192, but this dramatic title stuck in the public consciousness. It perfectly encapsulates our journey today, leaving us with one final thought to consider. When faced with the messy, pragmatic, and heavily debated historical reality of a king, why do we so often choose to remember the towering, simplified myth instead?